The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine campus of Elysium International Academy. Nestled in the Swiss Alps, where the air was thin and the gravity of expectation hung heavier than the mountain mist. Maya Chun adjusted her worn backpack straps and took a deep breath of the crisp air that made her lungs burn, not from the altitude, but from the knowledge that she didn't belong here, unlike her classmates who arrived in private jets and luxury vehicles. Maya had taken 3 buses and a train to reach this place. The Global Education Initiative had selected her from thousands of applicants in disaster zones worldwide, calling her their diversity success story. She was the girl from the Philippines who had survived Typhoon Pitra, the earthquake that leveled her school, and the volcanic eruption that displaced her family 3 times. The academy housed the children of world leaders, tech billionaires, and old money families whose ancestors had shaped continents. These were kids who had never known hunger, never slept in evacuation centers, never watched their homes wash away in mudslides. They moved through the world with the effortless grace of those who had never had to fight for survival. Maya's roommate, Isabella Rossini, was the daughter of Italy's prime minister. She spoke 4 languages fluently and had been taking violin lessons since she was 3. Across the hall lived Alexander Petrov, whose oligarch father owned half of Siberia's oil reserves. Then there was James Wellington Price, heir to a banking dynasty that had financed railways across 3 continents. But the one who made Maya's life truly miserable was Ethan Blackwood, son of the tech mogul who had revolutionized global communications. Ethan had the kind of casual cruelty that came from never having consequences touch him. He was handsome in the way that money could buy perfectly straight teeth, designer haircuts, and the confidence that came from knowing Daddy's lawyers could make any problem disappear. "Look what the charity case dragged in," Ethan announced as Maya entered the dining hall on her first morning. His voice carried across the room, causing conversations to halt. "I heard she's from one of those countries where they eat bugs. Think she knows how to use a fork?" The laughter that followed wasn't malicious from most of the students. They were just going along with the social hierarchy. But Maya felt each chuckle like a small cut. She had survived disasters that would have killed most of these kids. Yet, here she was, being mocked for her background. Isabella tried to defend her. "Leave her alone, Ethan. She's here on merit." "Merit?" Ethan's eyes glittered with amusement. "She's here because the board needed a poster child for their diversity program. A real-life victim they can parade around to make themselves feel better." About their privilege, Maya said nothing. She had learned long ago that words were weapons in the hands of those who had never faced real danger. Instead, she sat down, unpacked her simple lunch, and began to eat. But inside, she was calculating, measuring, waiting. 3 weeks into the semester, Maya had established a routine of invisibility. She excelled in her classes. Her mathematics and science scores were among the highest in the academy's history, but socially, she remained an outsider. The other students had formed their cliques based on family connections and shared experiences of privilege that Maya couldn't relate to. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the academy's headmistress, had built her reputation on creating an environment where tomorrow's leaders could thrive. The school occupied a converted luxury resort, complete with a state-of-the-art conference center where students presented their research projects to panels of distinguished guests. Everything was designed to mimic the high-pressure environments these students would eventually inhabit as adults. The Academy's unique feature was its adaptive learning environment, a sophisticated system that monitored student stress levels and adjusted environmental conditions accordingly. Temperature, humidity, air pressure, and even subtle gravitational variations created by the mountain's geology were all carefully controlled to optimize learning conditions. Ethan's harassment had evolved from casual cruelty to calculated psychological warfare. He had discovered that Maya's family had been displaced by natural disasters multiple times, and he used this information like a scalpel. During group projects, he would accidentally mention earthquakes or tsunamis, watching Maya's face for reactions. He convinced other students that she was unstable because of her traumatic background. My father's security team ran a background check. Ethan confided to a group of students within Maya's earshot. Her family has been disaster refugees since she was 5. They've lived in more evacuation centers than actual homes. No wonder she's so intense. Maya's friend Isabella tried to intervene. You're being cruel, Ethan. She's been through more than any of us. Exactly, Ethan replied smoothly. She's damaged goods. This place is for future leaders, not charity cases with PTSD. The cruel irony wasn't lost on Maya. These students would inherit a world facing climate change, natural disasters, and resource scarcity, exactly the challenges she had been surviving her entire life. While they debated theoretical solutions in air-conditioned classrooms, she had lived through the reality of civilizational collapse on a local scale. Dr. Hartwell, despite her progressive ideals, seemed oblivious to the social dynamics playing out under her watch. She praised Maya's academic performance, while completely missing the systematic isolation orchestrated by Ethan and his followers. The breaking point came during a group presentation on global crisis management. Maya had been assigned to Ethan's team along with Isabella, James, and 2 other students. Maya's research on disaster response was thorough and practical, drawn from personal experience. But when it came time to present their findings to a panel of visiting dignitaries, Ethan made his move. Before we begin, he announced to the distinguished panel, I think you should know that our research has been influenced by one team member's personal bias. Maya's family background has made her somewhat emotional about these topics. The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. He was positioning her lived experience as a weakness, her survival as a disqualification. Maya felt the familiar burn of humiliation, but this time it was different. This time she wasn't going to run. The Grand Assembly Hall was the crown jewel of Elysium Academy, a soaring space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered breathtaking views of the Alpine peaks. Today, it hosted the semester's most important event, the Global Leadership Symposium, where students presented their capstone projects to an audience of world leaders, policymakers, and media representatives. Maya's presentation on adaptive resilience in crisis management was scheduled for 2 p.m. She had worked for weeks on research that combined her academic knowledge with hard-won personal experience. Her data on disaster response wasn't theoretical. It was written in the scars on her hands from digging through rubble and the memories of nights spent in evacuation centers. The audience was intimidating. Ambassadors, CEOs, Nobel laureates, and journalists from major international publications. These were people who shaped global policy, who decided the fate of nations with their recommendations and investments. Maya's parents, watching via livestream from their small apartment in Manila, represented the other side of that equation, the people who lived with the consequences of those decisions. As Maya approached the podium, she felt the weight of representation. She wasn't just presenting her research. She was speaking for every refugee, every disaster survivor, every person who had been dismissed as damaged goods by those who had never faced real hardship. Distinguished guests, she began, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. My research focuses on the gap between theoretical crisis management and practical disaster response. While we develop sophisticated models for predicting and preventing crises, we often ignore the most valuable resource we have, the knowledge of those who have survived them. The presentation was going well until Ethan made his move. He had been assigned as her discussion partner, a role that was supposed to involve asking thoughtful questions to deepen the conversation. Instead, he used it as an opportunity for public humiliation. "Maya," he interrupted, his voice dripping with false concern, "don't you think your personal experiences might compromise your objectivity? I mean, someone who has lived through multiple disasters might have a skewed perspective on risk assessment." The audience murmured. Maya felt the familiar heat of shame rising in her cheeks. Ethan continued, his voice growing more confident as he sensed her discomfort. "In fact, I wonder if inviting traumatized individuals to policy discussions might actually be counterproductive. Shouldn't we rely on experts who can think clearly without being clouded by emotional baggage?" The hall fell silent. Maya stood at the podium, feeling the eyes of the world's most powerful people upon her. This was Ethan's masterstroke, using her moment of triumph to expose what he saw as her fundamental unworthiness. But Maya didn't respond with anger or defensiveness. Instead, she did something that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. She sat down. Asterisk, asterisk. Asterisk, the simple act of sitting seemed almost anticlimactic after Ethan's dramatic attack. Maya lowered herself into the chair behind the podium with the same careful precision she used for everything else, movement born from years of navigating unstable ground, collapsed buildings, and environments where a single wrong step could mean death. What the audience didn't immediately understand was that Maya's body had been shaped by forces that none of them had ever experienced. She had learned to move efficiently under the crushing pressure of survival, where every calorie burned and every breath taken had to be justified by necessity. Her muscles had been forged in the gravity well of genuine hardship, where weakness meant death and strength meant another day. The Academy's adaptive learning environment began to respond almost immediately. Dr. Hartwell had always been proud of the sophisticated sensors that monitored stress levels, environmental conditions, and even subtle physiological changes in the student body. The system was designed to optimize learning by adjusting pressure, temperature, and atmospheric composition based on real-time feedback from the occupants. But the system had been calibrated for students who had never known real pressure. The sensors began detecting something unprecedented, a human being who was completely relaxed in a situation that should have been overwhelming. Maya's heart rate was steady, her breathing calm, her muscle tension minimal. The system interpreted this as a dangerous anomaly, someone who was either in shock or had developed an abnormal stress response. Safety protocols activated. The environmental controls began making subtle adjustments, increasing atmospheric pressure to what the system calculated would be normal stress levels for a human in Maya's situation. The temperature dropped slightly. The humidity increased. Most importantly, the system began adjusting the microgravitational field that existed due to the Academy's unique mountain location. Maya remained perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her expression serene. She wasn't frozen with fear or paralyzed by humiliation. She was simply being herself, a person who had learned to find calm in the eye of the storm, who had discovered that sometimes the most powerful response to aggression was absolute stillness. The distinguished guests began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The atmospheric pressure was increasing beyond the range of their climate-controlled luxury. Ambassadors who had spent their careers in perfect conditions began to feel the weight of air that Maya had been breathing since childhood. CEOs who had never experienced genuine physical discomfort started to loosen their ties. Ethan, who had been reveling in his moment of social dominance, began to look pale. The environmental changes were affecting him more than most. His body, pampered by a lifetime of perfect conditions, had no tolerance for the pressure that Maya considered normal. "Is everything all right?" Dr. Hartwell asked, her voice carrying a note of concern as she noticed the discomfort spreading through the audience. Maya finally spoke, her voice carrying clearly through the hall despite the increasing atmospheric pressure. "I'm fine," she said simply. "This reminds me of home." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The girl who had been mocked for her background was the only person in the room who was comfortable as the environment shifted toward the conditions that had shaped her entire life. The environmental controls continued their calculated adjustments, creating conditions that Maya's body recognized as familiar, while everyone else in the room discovered what Deathworld really meant. The atmospheric pressure had increased to levels typical of a major storm system, nothing dangerous, but enough to make pampered bodies remember that comfort was a luxury, not a birthright. Ethan was the first to crack. His face had gone from pale to green, and his breathing became labored as his body struggled with pressure variations that Maya had experienced every typhoon season since she was 5. The boy who had mocked her for being damaged goods was now gripping his chair, his knuckles white with effort. "I don't. I can single quotes T ... double quotes," he gasped, his voice barely audible. Maya stood then, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to navigate unstable ground. She walked to the environmental control panel with the confidence of someone who understood systems born from necessity rather than convenience. Her fingers found the manual override that Dr. Hartwell had forgotten existed. "The system is responding to stress indicators," Maya explained to the room, her voice calm and educational. "But it's calibrated for people who have never experienced real pressure. When it detected someone who is actually comfortable in a high-stress situation, it assumed something was wrong." She adjusted the controls with practiced efficiency, bringing the atmospheric pressure back to the pampered levels that the Academy's occupants expected. The relief in the room was palpable. Diplomats loosened their collars. CEOs stopped sweating, and the distinguished guests gradually returned to their normal colors. "On my world," Maya continued, turning back to face the audience, "we call this Tuesday morning what you just experienced, the pressure, the discomfort, the feeling that your environment was actively hostile. That's my normal. That's what shaped me. That's what Ethan calls emotional baggage." She looked directly at Ethan, who was still struggling to recover his composure. "You want to know about bias? Your bias is thinking that comfort is the natural state of the world. Your bias is believing that because you've never had to survive real hardship, those who have are somehow less qualified to understand it." Dr. Hartwell was staring at Maya with new respect. The distinguished guests were leaning forward, suddenly interested in what this remarkable young woman had to say. The climate crisis, resource scarcity, natural disasters, these aren't theoretical problems for academic debate. They're realities that billions of people live with every day. While you discuss these issues in air-conditioned conference rooms, people like my family are living through them. Our perspectives aren't compromised by trauma, they're informed by truth. Maya walked back to the podium, her movements sure and steady. "My research shows that the most effective crisis management strategies come from communities that have actually survived crisis. The theoretical models developed by those who have never faced real hardship consistently fail when applied to real-world situations." She gestured to the environmental controls. "This system failed today because it was designed by people who don't understand what pressure really means. Just like most of our global crisis management systems are designed by people who don't understand what crisis really means." The audience was completely silent now, hanging on her every word. Ethan had retreated into his chair, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "You want to know the difference between me and everyone else in this room?" Maya asked, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "When things get hard, you panic. When things get hard, I get to work. That's not a weakness. That's exactly what this world needs." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I didn't defeat the bully through strength or violence. I defeated him by simply being myself in a world that suddenly understood what that meant. The applause, when it came, was thunderous. But Maya barely heard it. She was thinking about her parents, watching from their small apartment in Manila, and all the other survivors around the world who had been dismissed as damaged goods by those who had never faced real fire. The Deathworld girl had found her voice, and the world was finally ready to listen. The end